and welcome to Dawn News English with 20 minutes. I'm Nadia Naqi with you. We have our legal expert Haider Waheed with us. And today we're going to be discussing what exactly happened at the Supreme Court. We all know that the date for the elections as decided by the Supreme Court for Punjab election is 14th May. However, there have been some briefings, the same kind of briefings that was given to Election Commission of Pakistan regarding the security matters as well as the money matters. But the hearing today, Supreme Court declared that Defense Ministry's plea seeking all elections simultaneously inadmissible. And in fact, it raised the question that, whether the Defense Ministry, was it Defense Ministry's mandate to even ask for this as a simultaneous election? However, it looks like that, Heather, it looks like that Supreme Court is not ready to step back despite all sorts of briefings given to the Supreme Court that may, allow it to understand that how difficult it is for the government and the related departments to actually hold elections in Punjab on 14th May.
Okay, so if you just look at the inception of all this, it would make it very clear that the Supreme Court and the Honorable Chief Justice in particular holds this constitutional mandate of conducting elections within 90 days to be sacrosanct. So
Right.
These petitions were pending in respective high courts, in the Lahore High Court and the Peshawar High Court. And yet the Chief Justice took suo moto action and brought everything unto himself at a time when he felt that enough time had passed, and because there was already a judgment that was not being complied with, without there being any kind of restraining order in the appeal, he felt like to wait would be futile, and 40 or some days had passed, and he felt like if this were to continue and if this entire due process were to be given, then we would end up beyond the 90 days, and so he took suo moto action. And from there, we see that the Chief Justice is very, very clear about this mandate being sacrosanct. Now, of course, he himself has extended the date twice now. Once previously, I believe it was somewhere mid-April, was it 9th or 14th, whatever it was. And then now we find that it has been extended to the 14th of May. However, he has held that elections should be held no later than 90 days. Or at a date closest as possible to 90 days. So proceeding on the premise that the Chief Justice is viewing this particular article of the Constitution to be sacrosanct and for everything else to be read with it. So the other argument goes that, okay, one article says hold it in 90 days, but another says you have to hold free and fair elections. So what if you can't hold free and fair elections in 90 days? Now, the Supreme Court is reading that to mean that you read these articles together and you have to hold elections in 90 days and you have to hold free and fair elections in 90 days. And if you are unable to hold elections in 90 days, that means that you are in breach of your constitutional obligation. And hence, perhaps he's now going to proceed with removing those that say that this can't happen. Reading that to mean that someone now is telling me that he can't do his job. We will have to wait and see to what extent the Chief Justice led bench is going to go. But it's very, very clear that they're not willing to entertain any kind of change of dates anymore. Now, the ECP on its own, by way of passing an order, did extend the date. And the Supreme Court, through this bench, came back with the verdict that the ECP has no jurisdiction, no mandate, no authority to extend the date. They can change the date within the 90 days or within that date that has been provided. They can bring it backwards, but they can't extend it, or they can't extend it beyond 90 days. And in this case, because the date was already beyond 90 days, they can't extend it beyond the 14th of May. And all the reasons that were given in the order, they didn't really go into them. Although those reasons were stated more than reasoned out with facts and figures and arguments, but nonetheless, the Supreme Court simply said that you, ECP, cannot extend the date. Now, they've extended that holding to everyone else. And over here again, they're of the view that, excuse me, Ministry of Defense, excuse me, anyone. The Constitution doesn't allow any of you, the Ministry of Defense, the federal government, the ECP, the Pakistan Army, anyone. No one is allowed under the Constitution to extend the date. That is what the Chief Justice-led bench is proceeding on. That, look, we aren't even going to go back and revisit this anymore. We've
That's
done it
fine,
once.
but then how are you going to hold it? Like, Supreme Court cannot conduct the election itself, right? It's the ECP's jobs to do it, along
Right.
with other related departments that have, given all the reasons that why they cannot lend their staff or cannot facilitate the ECP to hold the elections. So to what extent can the Supreme Court do? Why is the court, or do you think the court is acting very rigid over here?
Okay, two things. One, you said all the reasons, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if all these reasons have been reasoned out or there are facts and figures to support what they're saying. I'm not that as sure as you are. But nonetheless, the Supreme Court has not even gone there. They've simply said, we are not going to look at any reasons. They have said that no one has the right to extend the date. And let's face it, the reasons that have been given, I am not so sure if they're backed up by facts and figures and comparisons or real life situations that would, at this point in time, warrant for an extension of the date. I do think, in my opinion, that although the Constitution doesn't allow so, that the Supreme Court can, given the circumstances, given peculiar circumstances, extend the date, and they have. Can they extend it any further? The Supreme Court says no. In spite of the in-camera or the private briefings that they have now received from heads of agencies reportedly, and the report filed in the Supreme Court, and the petition filed by the Ministry of Defense in the Supreme Court, which they have held to be not maintainable, because they're saying that you are no one to ask for the extension of the date. You are no one to say that elections should be held on one same date. You are no one to say that free and fair elections cannot be held on the 14th of May. And to be very honest, really, I mean, who is the Ministry of Defense to say that they can't hold elections on the same date? It is nowhere near their mandate to even opine on something like that.
Maybe they must have said that, for us, no, they have said that for us to provide those security personnel twice in a very short span is not possible, keeping in mind or keeping in view the kind of operations that are being led in KP, in Balochistan, and areas of Sindh, as well as Punjab.
Yeah, but unless they are arguing that we need to now do away with parliamentary democracy until this issue is resolved, there is no way that elections can stop for those reasons. I mean, I again, as a layperson, I don't see it, what they're saying. But quite apart from what I can see or not see, I don't know if what they've submitted in the courts establishes what they're saying. I don't see it anyway. I mean, do you see the situation being any worse than 2018 or 2013 or 2008, was it? I don't know. I mean, I don't see it. But I'm not going to go by what I or you see. I am going to go by what they submit. And whatever they've submitted in the Supreme Court, does that provide cogent reasons for extending the date or not? And you see, there's another angle to this, Nadia, that look, the Ministry of Defense can come back and say, look, we can't provide you military personnel, or we can't provide you this or that, and here's why. But they can't say have elections on the same date. That's just simply not their purview. I mean, they are no one to say, okay, hold elections on the same date. I mean, that's just got nothing to do with that.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so Haider, I mean, we've seen, in the past how suo motu cases, lead to a logical end. But this is a very different case. There's a lot of political chaos on the political landscape. What, in your opinion, can the Supreme Court do? Because it is sticking to the Constitution, stipulated within it about 90 days of, holding elections after the dissolution of assemblies. So are we seeing contempt of court charges on the Prime Minister, on all the other departments?
Okay, now I think that the problem with how the Supreme Court has conducted itself, I think very respectfully, is that the suo motu was taken by virtue of a referral given by two members of a bench that had nothing to do with the subject matter when they gave it. Secondly, a full court wasn't formed, and when a 9-member bench was formed, 4 judges opined that the petition wasn't maintainable, and yet the judgment wasn't 4-3. And nonetheless, the court has proceeded now because they had reconstituted the bench to 5 members, and no one challenged that. I think that someone ought to have challenged it, that you can't change a 9-member bench to a 5-member bench when 2 of the judges have already opined. They cannot be removed from the bench, but none of that happened. Also, interestingly, the PMLN folks have not gone to court and said, where's my 4-3 judgment? Where's my 3-2 judgment? Look, there is one thing which is a judge's note, which is his decision maybe, but it's not part of the judgment of the case unless it is the judgment of the case. So if I was a PMLN lawyer, I would have gone to the Supreme Court and said, where's my 4-3 judgment, or where is any judgment? Because we haven't seen, we never saw that judgment, but no one did that. Then they went ahead with the PTI's petition, and they ruled that the ECP's extension of the date was in error, it was illegal, and they set that aside. And here we are. Now, coming to the second leg of your question, which is most important, that what happens next? How does the Supreme Court implement its order when it would appear, all ministries, the government, the authorities, the caretaker governments are refusing to comply. The ECP, everyone is saying, we can't do this. So what does the Supreme Court do? Now, the first step generally is that you bring in the bureaucrats, the ones that actually care more about their career than they do about any party head, any prime minister, because they outlive governments generally.
So many I've heard are going on leave, by the way.
Yeah, which is why the finance secretary has gone on leave. Because they don't want to be in the line of fire, because the Supreme Court is going to say, okay, so you were supposed to now sign on this and push this forward. You haven't done it. Out you go. And that will compromise his career. His ARCs will be affected. His career may be ruined completely. So the Supreme Court generally starts with the bureaucrats, because the ministers like Rana Sanaula are going to come in and they're going to throw the ministry at the footsteps of the Supreme Court and say, take it, we don't care, we're not doing it. Because their good and bad, their prosperity, their progress, their career entirely depends on their party heads. They are easily going to give their sacrifice, no question about it. But now let's come to the one person that might think, which is Shahbaz Sharif himself, because he's the Prime Minister. But more than that, he is the President of the PMLN. If he gets disqualified for 5 years in contempt proceedings, him, his son, and his politics and his control of the party goes. So let's face it, that whilst he always does what his elder brother asks, this time could be different. We don't know. So what will the Supreme Court do? Now, Chief Justice Umar Ata Bandial, over the course of his career and especially his tenure as Chief Justice, has been very sparing, as he has used his contempt powers sparingly. Even in this case, he has clearly said that my aim is to implement my order. I don't want to go after people in contempt. I don't want to remove people from office. However, if in implementing the order such has to be done, then that's another story. So I don't think contempt per se is the aim. The aim is for the order to be complied with. It's one thing to say we're not going to do it. It's one thing for the parliament. Okay, so what the Prime Minister has cleverly done is that he has tried to shift the burden across parliament. It's everyone.
Exactly.
It's everyone. Like, so if you want to proceed in contempt, you have to call the entire parliament. Of course, the Chief Justice is not that intellectually challenged to actually do that. So he is actually going to only call those whose signature is awaited to move things forward. I am pretty sure that he is not going to call a single unnecessary person. Unnecessary in this case being those that are not materially relevant to the implementation of the order. There's so much is said about Supreme Court judges, but they haven't proceeded in contempt proceedings at all. So it would appear that they're very task and solution oriented here, and for them the solution is and lies in the implementation of their order and for the elections to be conducted on the 14th of May. However, the jack here, as always, is because let's face it, the bureaucrats can't stand in front of the Supreme Court. No state bank governor is going to come in and say, I'm not going to do this. It's not possible. It doesn't happen.
And actually they shouldn't. They're supposed to abide by the law.
Shouldn't is another story, but I'm saying that it just never happens, and it cannot happen. Even the politicians would not, if they knew they weren't backed up by a power that is enabling them to do this. So in my estimation and assessment...
And that power, Haider, I'm just going to interrupt you here. That power still exists despite all the claims?
Well, of course it exists. I mean, let's not
despite
become...
Despite the claims that it is, so neutral.
Let's not be ostriches here. But having said that, one thing is very clear and it's interesting. At the National Security meeting, NSC meeting,
the briefing,
we didn't see any kind of a press release where jointly what was stated already in Parliament and in Cabinet was reiterated that we reject the Supreme Court order, or we won't follow it, or it's not implementable, nothing of the sort. And then we saw, however, that when the Chief of Army Staff went to the Parliament, there was some tacit approval / support that he conferred. Nothing like don't follow the Supreme Court order, but he did say that Parliament is the organ through which the will of the people is expressed, and they are the ones that will make decisions. So there was certainly a degree of support that was expressed by the Chief of Army Staff, which leads us to then assume that why was it that the national security meeting could not come up with something similar? Even something similar. I mean, certainly I wasn't expecting them to come up with something that would reject the Supreme Court order. Why would the armed forces take that on publicly on themselves? That would be ridiculous. But nonetheless, they didn't even come out with any kind of support. So it would appear that the other leg of the armed forces, the other wings like the Air Force and the Navy, or the Joint Chief was there as well. Was there not a consensus? Was there not an agreement? Because it seems like the Chief of Army Staff has been more forthcoming when he came to Parliament. So I don't know, this is now all speculation. But it would appear that the armed forces, wherever they might stand behind closed doors, definitely do not want a public display of being partisan anymore. That is clear. Or whether
that is very clear. I mean, they can't afford to have it. Whatever has been happening for the past 4 years, and especially after the ouster of the former Prime Minister, the kind of allegations that he levels against the former Chief of Army Staff, and of course the present government leveling, allegations against the former DGI.
One has to give it to Imran Khan in that way that, look, after a very, very disappointing, perhaps I would say dismal performance as a Prime Minister, a very demotivating, uninspiring tenure, this guy comes out and he makes everyone forget about that. And he makes it all about what wrong was done to him, and he makes it all about, look who they brought in.
Yes, exactly. I mean, he's. I would say that he really used it very cleverly to his own benefit. Okay. Lastly, I would like to ask something very interesting over here. We've heard time and again the honorable judges talking about political dialogue, and we also know that there is a dialogue that is to take place. Sirajul Haq Saab is leading it, and after Eid, all parties conference may be convened. And let's say a date is decided, and that date is not, of course, 14th May, but someday, let's say, hypothetically, what happens then to this case? Does it become a rule of the court, or, what happens?
Well, it would have to, and I have no doubt in my mind that in spite of what the Supreme Court has said today about this date now being sacrosanct and moving forward, there is definitely room, and I think they alluded to it as well, that if all the parties would agree, the PTI and the PMLN in particular, if they were to agree to any other date other than 14th of May, there is no way on earth do I think that the Supreme Court would stand in the way. I think they would very happily just brush this case off like this, like dandruff, away from their shoulder, and be very thankful and be very, very thankful that they've come out together with a date. Now, technically speaking, however, the Supreme Court can say, although I don't expect it to say, that look, this election is the constitutional right of the people. You can't just get together and go beyond a constitutional mandate. This is not about you. This is about the people's constitutional right to have their elections within 90 days or closest to it. So you can't just agree, all of you, that, okay, let's have it in 2 months from now. But I still, practically speaking, think that whatever date PTI and PMLN agree to is going to be the date.
And for that, I mean, now this is something that is my question: that why will Supreme Court then agree? Because Supreme Court abides by the Constitution, upholds the Constitution. Here, all political parties, let's suppose, decide a date which is not 14th May, which at present the Supreme Court really wants the election to be conducted on that particular date, despite all the reasons being given by various departments of the government.
Yeah, it's because the assumption here is that we have enough representatives of the people to come in and say and agree on something for us to not worry about people becoming disenfranchised. That would be the assumption. Now, strictly speaking, I told you that that is perhaps not accurate, and you should still proceed with the constitution and not with what these parties agree. But I think, practically speaking, I see an agreed date, prevailing. The problem here has been, and you kind of allude to it, that the Supreme Court has not always been consistent about being strict about things, and then about being lenient about things, then having a liberal construction of text, and then having a somewhat of a stricter construction of text, and that's been somewhat of a problem, right? So you see the Supreme Court being interpreting text loosely at places, and then being completely strict about another thing. And then when we look at 2018, what happened to Nawaz Sharif, and then you compare with what's happening to Imran Khan, and Nawaz Sharif was put in jail. He wasn't on the ballot. He couldn't campaign. His party had to lose the election. All of that seemed so orchestrated. And we find that now the very people who trampled on the Constitution are upholding it. Now, I'm not suggesting that upholding of the Constitution can ever be bad, in spite of the double standards of those doing so. But I am saying that, politically speaking, at least, one can see what Maryam Nawaz is saying in this regard, that what's good for the goose must be good for the gander. I think that's more of a political argument, however, than a legal one.
Thank you so much, Haider, for being with us on our show. Yes. Unfortunately, time is over, but things are getting more interesting. More interesting, I'd say. And we're going to really have more of sittings with you on 20 minutes, so that we can actually understand then what is going to happen. Is it going to
Look forward to it.
Or any other day as far as Punjab elections are concerned. That's all for now. Take care of yourself. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.